Welcome to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. We're trying something a little bit different today. My son, who has been joining me in the last few podcasts, is now behind the camera and working as the producer. We're going to be trying to work with a few different cameras so that I can show you Afghans that have been made by my grandmother, my grandmother-in-law, my daughter, and even a little tiny square or two made by me. So there will be discussion, a little bit of some hand spun, but for the most part, we're going to be talking about granny square Afghans. In this case, my granny's square Afghans. When I was getting this stuff ready for this, I told my son it's my granny's squares, and he's like, "Well, it would be plural, not just possessive." I said, "Yes, but it looks prettier if I just say my granny, my granny's squares." But we are going to be talking about granny squares that have been made both by, excuse me, my grandmother-in-law and my daughter. I'm even going to show you some squares that have been made by my son. So let's go ahead and get started on this special Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric, talking about granny squares. So we'll talk about, and excuse me, I'm having a tiny bit of seasonal allergies. Go figure. Lots of fiber around. The cats are all circling around, and a couple of the things here on the table that I'm about to show you. In fact, this one right here is a cat bed. And for those of you, we'll actually start with this. For those of you that have been following me for quite some time, this is my Christmas spin from a couple years ago. I had an advent of green fiber that I put together, that every day of December, I pulled out another little bundle of green fiber, and let me see if I can get in the camera, and I spun up a section of it. So it was rather random, just pulling it out of a basket. When I had my skein done, I made a granny square. It has been through the wash. It needs to go through the wash again because it became the perfect cat bed. Turn around this side. And I'm really pleased because after years of crochet and taking more time than I might have done in my youth, I've learned how to actually make a square granny square. The first granny square that I made many years ago, 40 some odd years ago, maybe, yeah, maybe a little longer. Yeah, actually probably 45 years ago. The first one I made is this wonky granny square. Let me pull it under the, there we go. And I made this when I was still in elementary school. I was probably about the age of 10 or 11. And that's an interest. I have a cat that is really close to causing trouble. But I made this when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I was taught to do the granny square by my mother. And you can see it, yeah, we can bounce back to this. My grandmother had gotten into making granny squares quite prolifically. I think by this time, late 70s, early 80s. And they taught me how to do this granny square for a little project activity that I was doing. This one is made out of baby acrylics, worsted weight, and at some point I must have been, it's probably due to my tension issues, but somewhere along the line I must have miscounted or my tension was off because it does not, it does not hang straight. It is not square. It's wobbly. But I made this. I gave it to my dolls. And I did not do another granny square for maybe, I did not make another granny square. My son's behind the camera giving me this look of like, what? I did not make another granny square until I was probably 50 years old. So another 40 years had to pass, kind of deal. And then I decided to make a granny square. Hand spun. I'll show it up here. 2 hand spuns. This is a colored wool that I've overdyed with black cherry Kool-Aid. This isn't a more taupe wool that I have dyed with probably just a cherry Kool-Aid or a pink lemonade. I can't remember. But I took the 2 individual spins, I crocheted up a granny square, and then I put a pillow liner with a raspberry kind of colored fabric on it, red toned fabric underneath. So I'll put it under there we can see up close. I love working with wool when it comes to projects like this. It is a problem if you end up getting wool moths because they can nibble and eat, and so you can have fraying. But the lovely thing about working with wool, and I'll show you that in just a moment, is that if, like here, I can show, I've done a little stabilization. It's not a repair. You can see it's an orange thread. It is a stabilization. I believe wool moth or a carpet beetle, something that likes to eat yarn, got a hold of this and nibbled just a tiny bit, just enough that these 2 sections came apart. I put this repair on it, or I should say the stabilization, leaving the ends so that I could go back later, take them out, and repair it more seamlessly, more invisibly. But I wanted to show that because I will be showing you another Afghan that is made of wool that is much older. In fact, it's older than I am. And it had some moth damage. And we can try to seamlessly blend in the, a new yarn, find and match the color. In my case for today, what I'll be showing you is I'm just stabilizing the loops so they don't continue to fall apart. But in this case, one little damage just took a piece of wool. Now, it would be very easy for me to do a little needle felting or just felt that a little and it wouldn't come apart. With wool, even if we do get a little bit of damage, there's much greater likelihood that the fibers will stick together, stay together, and at least give us a little bit of time before it starts to unravel to try to fix it. Now, we can show you back on this green one. You can see this one has been felted. The holes have been closed up quite a bit. It's getting fuzzy, and this is wonderful. And if I had felted this one before putting it on a pillow, it would be more moth resistant. Moths will still eat it. But then all of those crocheted pieces, if something did happen, would want to stay together. So I like working with wool for that reason. Because unlike with acrylic, and acrylic can kind of mesh together a little bit over time. I have some tied quilts in which the acrylic yarn kind of mushes together just a bit. But if something happens with this, it can come undone. It can, even years later, it can unravel. Whereas with the wool, the more you use it, the more it folds and felts and wants to stick together. That is, as long as you're using a wool that is not superwash. So this is about granny squares, and talking about the fibers that we use for making granny squares is important because I'm now going to move over into not the ones that I've made, but the ones that my grannies, my grandma and my great aunt and my husband's grandma. We're going to talk about those. So we're going to start off with the woman. Well, we're going to start off with my husband's grandmother. My husband's grandmother, unfortunately, passed away when my mother-in-law was only 20 years old. We have here in a picture, actually, what I believe is the Christmas just before she passed away. She passed away in December, and behind her in that picture, you will notice an Afghan, a granny square Afghan sitting on the back of the chair under a coat. We're going to show you a picture here now of this Afghan. This is the Afghan that I'm holding in my hands. It is made with wool. It has felted a little. Oh, and I just found another area that I have to. Let me get another while I'm just here. When we got this out to start to record today, I haven't pulled it out of its protective cover, not since we've moved at least. And I haven't actually spent a lot of time with this one. It was given to me. When my mother-in-law passed away. It is the only item that I have, that my family has, of my husband's grandmother. My husband's grandmother was a quilter. My husband's grandmother was a crocheter. I don't know if she was a knitter, but I do know that she did quilt, and she clearly did also make a granny square Afghan. She was a farm wife, just like my grandmother, and I'm going to put this under the camera so you can see. All I've done is I've threaded a piece of wool yarn. I've threaded a needle. I've caught here, secured that a little, and then I've gone through and I've caught the loops. I don't know how much because it's black. I've caught the loops, and then I can just come back in, catch this piece again, and now it's stabilized. It is not a repair. It is not going to hold up to a ton of wear. If I wanted to have this where this Afghan was out being used, I would need to do something a little bit more permanent than that. But you see the black around the multicolored centers. And I like to call this a stained glass granny square Afghan blanket. It, to me, always made me think of stained glass. But when I pulled this one out of its protective case, out of its storage, I found at least 6 areas that there was some moth damage. So, and I'm like, and I've just found one more, and I've just found probably one that had been repaired. So I'm not the first person to have repaired it. This repair that I'm seeing, let me show under the thing. I have one here that needs to be repaired, and that one has been repaired by someone other than me. So today, what I have done to have this ready is I've just tried to stabilize it, so as I'm picking it up and I'm moving it around, I'm not putting strain on the areas that aren't connected. I can just take my own wool, put it in there, and one of the things I can do is I could, if I wanted to repair it, I could find wool that is of a similar color. I could try to crochet the connectors again. I could crochet the stitches again. I am probably just going to put these temporary repairs just to hold them in place. Let that be something if my children decide that they want to, especially my daughter, if she decided she wanted to, because she definitely enjoys some of these fiddly bit. But then my son, he is here in the house. If he wanted to, he could come in with yarn that is of a similar color. He could weave it in. He could do one of two things. He could try to crochet them back together, or he could take yarn of a similar color and, as I've done, go through and catch all the loops, and then using a needle felting tool, he could needle felt those so that they will want to stay together. So one of the things with granny squares, especially these that have the many multiple rings, is every single color change is an end that has to be woven in. And if you didn't leave a long enough end as you wove it in, those ends can work their way out. I think what I'm seeing here is not that their ends didn't necessarily have a long enough end, but there has been moth damage. That seems to be what I'm seeing in this. But we can repair this if we'd like to. We can, when you talk about people repairing quilts or Afghans or these type of items, you can repair it so that it's just stabilized. You can repair it so that it is functionally strong and usable, but you can see the repair. And you can also try to make the repair invisible. That's going to be something that I'm going to let my children decide to do, because in the end, it is their granny squares. Sorry if the camera's doing on the autofocus. We're trying out new cameras, new type of technology. So sorry, I'm just coughing. We have the windows open. We have the cats. We have, this has been at some point in its life stored in mothballs. And while the smell's not terribly strong, it is strong enough that I think it's adding to my little bit of my respiratory. So I'm going to gently move this one outside of my breathing zone. And then I'll come back. So that is the granny square. It was made by a woman named, and we'll bring up the picture of her again, Loretta Van Zydam. And that is my husband's grandmother. It's his maternal grandmother. And I tried to choose, I don't have many pictures. I had to scour through family Facebook group to find it and see what I could find, because we don't have a lot of photos. But I do know that she was a crocheter. I know that she was a farmer's wife. I know that she was really good at making pies. And I know that she also made quilts, although I've never seen any of her quilts. I also know that she passed away when my mother-in-law was 20. And she passed away about the age of 60. And my mother-in-law passed away about the age of 60 as well. So my husband never knew his grandmother. And so it is a choice item to be able to have one thing that connects him to that that woman who I've heard was really quite a remarkable, strong farming community, Midwestern woman. So now we're going to move on to the woman who taught me so much of what I do. So in the picture that we have here, we have 4 women. They are 4 sisters. They are the daughters of Tay and Levon Grazer. The eldest of the sisters is my grandmother, Marjorie. And her name was Marjorie Grazer Burt. And her sisters are Audrey, Jean, and Marion. Marion there on the end in the blue, Marjorie on the other side. And I grew up knowing these 4 women. They outlived my own mother. My grandmother didn't, I should say. My grandmother passed away when I was still in my 20s. Memory lane here. My grandmother passed away when I was in my 20s. My mother passed away when I was in my in my late 30s. My aunt Marion outlived everyone else. She's the baby in the family, and she lived to not only become a little bit of a fill-in grandma for me, but she also became a fill-in grandma for my children. And she is the woman who taught my daughter how to crochet, because my daughter didn't believe I crocheted. She knew I knitted. She knew that my mother knitted. She knew that Grandma Marjorie knitted. or knit or crocheted, but she decided that Mom didn't know how to crochet, so she wanted to crochet, and Aunt Marion was the person who was going to teach my daughter to crochet. So, and actually, I wasn't sure how I'd do this, but we're gonna start with my daughter crocheting, and then we'll finish with my grandma's quilts. So this is my daughter when she is about 11 years old, probably sometime just before she was turning 11, around the time she turned 11. My mom passed away when my daughter was only 10, going into her 11th year. My son had just turned 12, and we had to spend quite a number of times traveling back to take care of my mom's estate, my mom's home, taking care of all of the things that you have to do when someone passes away. And while I was dealing with that, my children would stay at the house. We were staying at the house of my Aunt Marion. And my daughter wanted to learn how to crochet, so my Aunt Marion taught her how to crochet. And my aunt pulled out a skein of quite old wool and taught her it in pink, very similar to the pink in the Afghan that she's holding. But she pulled out it and sat her down and gave her a crochet hook. And I had taught her some of the basics, but as so often with mothers and daughters, it doesn't always mesh well, especially at different points in their life. And I went away and had to deal with a bunch of legal stuff. And when I came back a few hours later, it was no more than 2.5 hours later, my daughter had a granny square. Actually, a granny square very much the same size as this green one. She had and I don't seem to have it here. It's probably packed away in a bin that I forgot. It's doll stuff. I'm not quite sure. We couldn't find it before doing this video, but I came home and my daughter had made this perfectly square, wonderful granny square. And all I could think of is, that's my attempt when I'm 10. How is my daughter making this perfect square? So we discovered that, yes, she loved doing crochet, and she was really good at doing, she had much more controlled, tighter gauge than me, than I have, and which is wonderful because having really loose gauge can be problematic. And so my daughter learned how to crochet sitting next to her great aunt. So Aunt Marion was wonderful. She had become very, very close. The sisters were close. The older two sisters, Marjorie and Audrey, were very close in age. Jean and Marion were a little closer in age. But when my great-grandmother passed away, Marion and Marjorie became very close together, the baby and the oldest. And when my grandmother passed away, Marion really felt that loss. And she has tons of her own children and tons of her own grandchildren and great-grandchildren before she passed away, passed away just a few years back. But she loved having my daughter sit next to her and learn how to crochet. So my daughter went home. I went online. I had no idea how much yarn I needed to buy. And sometimes it's easier to buy in bulk than it is to buy in smaller amounts. So we bought the yarn to make, let me stand over here a little. We bought the yarn to make this small little doll Afghan, little baby Afghan. And she had enough to make this little teddy bear. Let me bring it up here, little teddy bear. We'll put it under so you can see up close. She very even crochet stitches. Yeah, just not, and she crocheted the blocks together rather than sewing them together. She crocheted them together, and I still have a ton of that yarn, especially this raspberry. I don't know if I have this lighter pink left, but I know I have a lot of this darker raspberry. And she made this, and I just couldn't get over how tight and small and compact her crochet was. But we were really pleased. Now, she did continue to crochet on and off. Life got interesting. She took up weaving. She did a lot of weaving. She took up knitting. Finally got past that, well, she wanted to learn to crochet because mom knit. She wanted to do something different. When, with the death of my mother, who was a just very prolific knitter, my daughter decided she would take up knitting. So she took up knitting. But if we fast forward another 12 years, all of a sudden we have my hand spun that I spun up in Tour de Fleece 2020, my Countdown to Christmas collection of yarns that I sent to both of my kids, or gave to both of my kids, so that they could make granny squares. And I'll show you these in just a minute. But the granny square Afghan that you see my daughter making there, she finished it in 2021. And it is all my own hand spun. It's all hand dyed. It's all documented in Ravelry for Tour de Fleece. And she made that granny square blanket. And it was wonderful for her to finish that. When she was in the Peace Corps in Mongolia, she had started a granny square blanket and left it behind for one of the women there to finish. When she was in Peace Corps in Colombia, I think she did the same thing. So it was lovely. Though this one is lovely. She has this hand spun, 100% wool, nice and heavy. She loves having it on her bed. My son is working on making his. He's got the squares, put them, of the hand-dyed, hand-spun. He's got his squares he's working on. He's probably a third of the way through his. And so he had to actually undo a few and tighten them up because, unlike his sister, he inherited his mother's extraordinarily loose gauge. And so his blocks are needing to be blocked. And they're larger than his sister's. But in the end, it's still going to work just fine. I guess in my mind, I never realized how loose a granny square Afghan could be, because even this behind me is more dense together. My grandmother Marjorie was an amazing crochet artist. She could do the doilies. She could do filet crochet. She could do she was really, really good at being able to follow the patterns, follow the charts, and make the Afghans, make the doilies. And she left this one specifically, this brown one is the one that she made for me specifically for Christmas one year. And you can see it's all acrylic. You can see it is bright colors, but she chose the brown tones to go around it. That was her color scheme that she gravitated to. She liked the autumn colors, much like my son. My grandmother did actually kind of like the autumn colors. She decorated her house in autumn colors, not just because it was the only colors available in the 70s, but because she did actually kind of like them. My grandfather, he liked more of the jewel tones, and my grandmother acquiesced and made one red Afghan for him that I don't have, because when he passed away, it was in the nursing home with him. And there was a young woman who had been one of his caregivers right at the end, who had had a baby just in the year before. And my grandfather had just fallen in love with that baby. And I knew that red was my grandfather's favorite color. And I knew that the Afghan sitting on his bed was one that my grandmother had made him. And I gifted that to this young woman and her baby as a memory of this man who'd become a surrogate grandfather for her little child. So, because at the end of the day, if we don't share it, if we don't use it, yes, we have memories and it's great to have them, but we need to actually sometimes, especially when you have as many as my grandmother had made. She tried to make something of this nature for each of her grandchildren. And if she'd have lived long enough and would have been able to, she would have made more. She ended up with Parkinson's in the last few years of her life, and so it all slowed down. And I have an Afghan, one of the what I call the stained glass Afghans. She made 2 that are lap size. We're going to show you one of them. 2 that look like this, and she was working on a 3rd one when she either ran out of yarn or she began to struggle with her hands. The 3rd one that she's making is actually a dark brown, but she has 2 just like the one that's in the picture that we're showing. And you can see this is a scrap buster. That's what she was doing. She was doing a scrap buster. And I love it. I love that it has the big squares and it has the little squares. And this is the first time I've seen it hanging up like this so that I can see how pretty it is. All in its fullness. It's all acrylic. My grandmother moved away from wool as soon as acrylic became the most available. And she loved the bright colors. She loved the intensity. She loved the convenience of being able to throw them in the washing machine. And that Afghan gets thrown in the washing machine quite regularly because what we use it for is we fold it up and put it in rocking chairs as the cushions. And my cats... we'll go back to the main screen so you can see it. My cats think these are their own. And so you can see Whimsy here. She had just come over because she knew this was on the table. And she just curled up with it. And now she's going to go, oh my goodness, you picked me up. How dare you? But I have this one up close so we can take a look. And going back to what I was starting off speaking about. Acrylic does kind of pill. But this end does not want to stay tucked in. And that's one of the things. Here's another one. The ends don't stay nested. They work to the front. And I do have to go through and tie knots in places to get things to stay put at times. So it gets washed. The more it's washed, it does kind of pill. And it does help a little bit. But these ends work their way up. So when working with the granny squares, Afghan, these are great. It's great to be able to throw it in the wash, pull it out. I have thrown in wool, but it does shrink. And so you have now a much heavier, denser final product. But the acrylic, the advantage of the acrylic for its washability, for the fact that it can be a great cat bed, a cushion, it keeps its color, it doesn't fade, and the moths do not mess with this one. That advantage is offset by you really have to work on getting those ends woven in well. And I do not believe my grandmother wove them in well. She did not leave long enough tails to weave them in. And that's something that's important to know. And here's the thing. I don't think because I think what she was doing is she was following patterns that she was being inspired by the times. And in the 70s, the granny square became a popular thing again. And so she was making this because this is what was showing up in her craft magazines, her crochet magazines. And so she was doing that. And I suspect as frugal as she was, she thought, oh, well, I will conserve all of it, especially if I'm stash busting. I'll conserve my yarn. But this is a case where conserving the end, it's not helpful. Weave it in. Leave a long tail. Make sure you weave it in because they do tend to unravel. I have a couple of her Afghans. Not technically a granny square. It is a square. There's a word and I'm going to draw a blank on it. It's, so we talk about the granny square, but basically it is segments. So you're talking about afghans that are put together, blankets that are put together in the segments, much like patchwork is. And so you're making all of these individual pieces and connecting them. And this other afghan that I have of hers, she has these beautiful flowers crocheted on them. They're all connected together. It's really lovely. It's never been anything but a showpiece, and it has unraveled in at least 3 spots just with moving it around from place to place wear. So I have my brown one. I've shown you one of my granny's stained glass. Okay. But I have one more. And we don't have a picture of this in the distance, but we do have it here. You can see. This is also a granny square. But unlike the ones that I've been showing you so far, that even my daughter's that is starting in a square and working itself out, you'll see this one is still a granny square. It is still squares. It is still seamed together. Okay. But now we have a round motif in the center moving out into the square. We start with the traditional looking granny square in the center, moving out into the larger square. So it is a granny square. It's just not what I think we often think of as a granny square. And I do love this one. It is acrylic. It shows you again. It is acrylic. This is worsted weight. Okay. This is more of a baby sport weight. And this one is a lovely throw. I'm just so thrilled that I have this one. Because it shows a greater arrangement or a greater array of her skill, a greater depth of her skill than the standard granny square does. It starts to show how she understood the how to read the charts, and I really love this one because I can't always have a way to show the doilies that she made, but I can have this out. And because it is acrylic, it can be washed. I do not treat this one the same way I treat these. These are pretty durable as long as those ends don't wear out. But I do love this one. So I think I have shown you my granny squares. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, part of the reason that we're doing this tribute to the granny square is because somebody saw a picture of, or saw in a picture in my last video, one of these and wanted to know about it. And I thought this would be a good way to document some of what we have. The history and heritage that I've been blessed to have, I know is becoming really quite rare. I know that even in my generation, a lot of people don't have items that their grandmothers might have made. I know that a lot of the grandmothers, even my grandmother's generation, may not have actually made much. When World War II wrapped up, a lot of the United States moved into a commercial boom, and acrylics became more popular, and you could buy things. And so even if they did have their hand at making something, oftentimes they didn't make it through the generations. They didn't make it, they didn't survive. Either they were used up or they were replaced by something newer or fancier or a different color scheme. I've been very fortunate. My husband is fortunate to have he has this, we'll pop the picture up again. My husband has this piece from his grandmother. He has a baby blanket that was made by his grandfather's second wife, and that we cherish that as well. And we have quilts from his dad's side that, while are in different stages of well used, we do have that history. And so we know that we are very, very fortunate to have that. And then we know that it's rare, even for our generation. For our children's generation, it's interesting. When we start looking at the millennials and and Gen Z, we're starting to see where they might actually have grandmas making things. We have a resurgence. We keep going. In the 70s, there was a resurgence. A lot of this was because while my grandmother had made things in her youth, she decided to get on the Granny Square 1970s, early 80s Granny Square bandwagon. The Afghan that I showed you, that is my, this one on the screen now. That one, my grandmother-in-law passed away in 64. So that Granny Square is not part of the revival that predates the 1970s revival of arts and crafts and Granny Square craze that we're now seeing again today. Every so often, we see the cycle comes back. We keep seeing a return to some of the things that are of the older day. We see the Granny Square. We see different type of crochet clothing re-emerge, sometimes in just as strange a fashion as I unfortunately lived through. But hopefully, with an interest now in spinning and knitting and crochet in the United States having a resurgence, and I know that in other countries some have never lost their connection with the textiles, but hopefully, because there is such a resurgence, especially with videos like this going out, with people sharing their stories and sharing their crafts, hopefully more and more young people can say they have something that was made by their grandmother. That, to me, is one of the greatest joys. It's not just having these things, but knowing that if I'm sharing them and sharing my videos, I am hopefully inspiring others to create the things that then can be passed down. And with that, I will say, I know it's tough when your children and your grandchildren do not want what you've made. I have not experienced that myself, because my children actually are quite pleased when Mom makes them something. In fact, I have a to-do list of things that they want to have me make rather than them make. But I have experienced it from the perspective of being my grandmother's shadow. I have experienced it when the things that she has made for her children and grandchildren have been discarded, and discarded without passing it on to someone. It is not a criticism. It is just a commentary on the way sometimes life has to be. Some of the Afghans that were made by my dad's family, because my dad's mother, and I do have Afghans, but she did the ziggy zaggy 70s Afghans. Some of the ones that she made, because she was a much more prolific Afghan maker, crochet blanket maker, as opposed to quilts and other work. Some of the ones that she made, I've actually passed on to people in need. I have shared them with people who have suffered their houses burning down and needing blankets during wintertime. There's only so many my children can use, especially where they're making their own. I do understand how, though, sometimes the things that we make aren't cherished, and we want them to be cherished. My suggestion is always, you make the thing, you give it away. You give it away hoping it will have wings and find itself in the place it can be loved. Whether it's with the person we've made it or someone else entirely. That's my prayer. That's my hope. That's my desire. And that's what I pass on to the people that I share my work with. Pass it on, give it away, no strings, no expectations, and let them use it as they need to use it. We just need to make sure that when we pass it on, to explain to those it's meant to be used. It's meant to be loved and cherished. And if the person that's receiving it no longer wants to love and cherish it and it's still in usable shape, pass it on to somebody who will. If we convey that as we make, if we remember that everything we make is a gift, not a burden, if we pass that on, then we will find hope, we will find joy, we will find peace in our craft. We wish everyone who wanted an heirloom like this would be able to have it. I know my husband's cousins would all love to have this. But this is not just an Afghan, and it's not just an Afghan made by a granny. This is something that when my mother-in-law received it, when her father passed away, this was something that gave her solace. This was something that gave her peace. This is something that gave her comfort. And that is something that she spent a great deal of her life not having. So for the brief while that she did get to have this, this was so much more than just an Afghan, just a blanket. And it's for that reason it is so special to us. Not just that it was made by a distant relative that my husband never knew, but because of how his mother, nearing her end of her own life, finally had something that was her own mother's. And that is what really made it special for us. Having that connection for my husband is so important. To know that his mother, at the end of her life, finally had something of her own mother's. Because when she was so young and her mother passed away, so much of her mother's possessions went on to the other sisters who already had homes of their own. And my mother-in-law never felt like she had something of her mom's. Blankets, whether they're quilted, whether they're crocheted, whether they're knitted, whether they're woven. They are a hug, and they can be a hug from the past. And for my mother-in-law, this was a hug from the past. And that is what is passed on to my husband and my children. We just have to deal with the fact that it smells like mothballs before the joy can be fully realized. All right, I'm going to leave you with, I'm sure, a long unwinding with fiber and fabric. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I know that it has been a joy to make, and I'm glad for my viewer who asked about my granny square Afghan. I hope you have had an enjoyable time unwinding with some fiber and fabric. Until the next time, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.